It's time for 41 is the Mic, a weekly Chiefs podcast with Nick Jacobs of KSHB 41 and Matt Derrick of Chiefs Digest. 41 is the Mic starts now.
Yes, everyone, welcome you. It's the bye-week edition of 41 is the Mic. I am Matt Derrick alongside muted tweet enthusiast Nick Jacobs. And
whatever are you talking about, Matt?
That's our first enthusiast recommended from social media, so I had to go with that. So
yeah, what are you talking about, Matt?
I have no idea. I try to be a man of the people, Nick.
Well, good job, because I know that was tweeted at me. Oh, I know what it was now. Sorry, it took me a minute. Yeah, no, I know what they're talking about. It was about somebody requesting. Yeah, it was about somebody requesting me to do voiceover work for every breakdown that I post. But I mean, the breakdown's in the tweet itself, so people can see it and observe it in their time, and not have to have sound and everything on at the same time.
And Baldy's got a lot more probably technology and geared his readiness because big network guy. They get more resources.
I mean, I don't know. I'm gonna leave that part alone.
Well,
I'm gonna let it be on that part.
It's the bye week. Chiefs are 5-0. I mean, can you be in a better spot at the bye week other than having a later bye week, which I think everybody would always like to have a later bye week, but
like we talked about before, I mean, I think this kind of worked out. I mean, the players' bodies and giving them rest and everything, you would love to see a bye week later in the year. But for what the Chiefs need to kind of find out about what they want to tinker with on offense after losing Hollywood Brown, after losing Pacheco, and after losing especially Rice recently, this gave them the full week to really kind of evaluate what they were doing if they wanted to, look at what is or isn't working in the red zone, and then also allow them to kind of feature some of the other players' skills here in the weeks ahead that they may need to more so, whether it's a 2, 3, or 4 tight end set, or if they want to feature Juju in a different way, or how they want to utilize Kareem Hunt. It just gave them a week to really kind of explore what they may need to adjust with this offense to be as effective as they want to be.
5-0. I don't know if it's entirely fair to have grade cards and report cards because it's 5 games in. It's still a fairly small sample size. But breaking down, just where this team's at right now and kind of our thoughts and observations. Let's start on the offensive side. What's kind of stood out to you, Nick, as far as the first 5 games?
I would say it was something we talked about in the preseason. Some of the left tackle issue. I think that caused some instability in their passing game. I think Mahomes got to a point in that Ravens game where he got a little bit more antsy about what was going to be on his blind side and when he needed to leave and when he needed to move up and when he needed to move around in the pocket. And I think that created some unsure moments for him. And it's not like it's the first time it's happened to him at the tackle position, because that's been a little bit of a revolving door since Eric Fisher for the most part. And I mean, they had Orlando Brown and everything, but he still had to move around with Orlando. Orlando was just normally taking a guy to a spot with his long arms. And if if the guy got past him, he got past him. And then Mahomes had to take off at that point. But, Mahomes got used to that set in that way. Then he had, obviously Donovan Smith. And Donovan had a little bit different style. Donovan wasn't amazing by any means, but he was able to get the job done and be consistent. And then, Wanye is kind of hit or miss from a pass protection perspective. For the most part, he's able to stabilize, but there are times where he does go up against speed or the power gets underneath his shoulder pads and will kind of drive him back somewhat. And then, Kingsley's still just trying to figure out the game and trying to figure out the timing of his punch and how to utilize power and how to find the power and to do all that. So, I mean, there's that. And then Jawan Taylor's kind of had some struggles the past couple of weeks at right tackle. So the tackle positions are really kind of what can either help raise this offense in the weeks ahead, or the Chiefs are going to have to work around it by getting the ball out quicker.
Yeah, and really one of the things that stands out to me when we've been talking about Mahomes' numbers, and And some of his numbers are better than his career averages, or, he's completing almost 70% of his passes. That would be a career high that he's at right now. And certainly that's a little bit of game planning and game calling, trying to get rid of the ball quicker. There's some things middle of the pack, but the one number that stands out the most to me are the turnovers, because his interception percentage is 3.8, and I can't really say that any of them, for the most part, are fluky. I mean, it's not like, last year at the beginning of the year when he had a lot of fluky turnovers. And even a couple of years ago, when he had that ridiculous stat that like 7 of his turnovers and interceptions had like a 70% chance of completion. This year, it's been more kind of clear cut. And not to say that there haven't just been some times when I think that maybe his eye has been on the left tackle spot, and maybe then only one eye is downfield. But, he's at his highest rate of interceptions in his career. What have you seen as far as Mahomes and the turnovers go?
Because I'm trying to think back to the Ravens one. That was when, if I remember correctly, between Tooney and Creed, that defender got collapsed back into the pocket into Mahomes, and he's getting ready to try to step up, and he threw off balance and tried to throw it away, and Smith made a great play on that one, if I remember correctly. That's either Ravens or Bengals, because then I know there's another one where somebody jumped in front of it when he was trying to fit it in a window to Kelsey, and maybe that was the Bengals one, but I know it's between those two AFC North games that those happened. The Falcons one with Justin Simmons, that was just him doing a touch throw instead of just kind of putting the velocity on it that he normally would and everything. And then the Saunders one, that one got a little bit behind Juju on his back shoulder there, and kind of Juju tried to body catch it, or I think he tried. I can't remember if he tried to. Yeah, I can't remember if he got his hands. His defender was kind of grabbing on a little part of his arm and everything. So I can't remember if it was a body catch or if he was. I don't think he was fully. He might have been extending his hands. I can't remember at this point. But I do know it ricocheted off of him to Colin Saunders. So, I mean, at the end of the day, like Mahomes has been really cautious with the football more than people realize. He's very mindful in the red zone, and that's part of that. That is another piece of that puzzle about why they may not have some of the efficiency and effectiveness in the red zone, is because Mahomes is being mindful with not trying to have turnovers at the rate that he did the past couple of years whenever he would try to be the gunslinger there at times and everything. So in that regard, I think Mahomes has been it's throttled him back a little bit from who he can be at times in games, and he's just got to find where that balance is at for him. But I also think in some regards it leads to the fact that he knows the defense can keep them in games. Just like last year at that point, he knows the defense can keep him in games to where I think he tries to do his part and limit the opposing offense getting more opportunities and putting the defense in bad spots to where they're tired. There's multiple turnovers, and a team can drive down on field because they're out there too much and far too often. So I think he's just at a point in his career where he's trying to find the balance between what he can do with the circumstances of the offensive line, what the receivers are capable of, what the receiving options are capable of, while also understanding that it's okay if he's not perfect and is like 2018 Mahomes and having to take opportunities and take chances to make big plays because he has a defense that actually can stop somebody, like 2018 when he didn't have a defense that could stop anybody.
Yeah, and I stand by like what I said a few weeks ago, that I thought through the first 3.5 games of the season that, a lot of his problems were he was trying to be too perfect. He felt like, it was playing like everything was on his shoulders and that everything was on every single throw and that it had to be down to the right blade of grass, or it was his fault. It was on him. And, quarterbacks can't play that way. They have to play, with the instincts. They've got to be able to play with letting loose. And I think that we saw a lot more of that in the last 6 quarters. you didn't really see any of the balls, I think, being at risk against New Orleans. There was the one, Saunders interception. I think that's almost in its own special category. I kind of even put that one on maybe the play call, but even on the defender, because obviously Colin Saunders had seen that play a lot, so he was in the right place at the right time to make the play. But, I think you've seen more of that gunslinger Mahomes in the last 6 quarters, and I think that can only lead to good things. Let's switch to the other side, Nick, defensively, because that's where this team has made its money. That's why it's 5-0. This defense has been playing extremely well through the first 5 games.
Yeah, and so much of it has to do with excuse me, with the front. Honestly, Chris Jones. You can say front 7 and they all play their part and everything, but Chris Jones has been a one-man wrecking machine. Even though he takes on double and triple teams, like Chris still commands that, and whether it's run or pass, Chris has his eye on a certain prize, and as you and I've talked about on other shows, it's clearly Defensive Player of the Year. And that's one of the final pieces that gets him into the Hall of Fame in my book. It locks in the Hall of Fame. Doesn't mean he's not a Hall of Fame caliber player. It's just once you get one of those honors, it's tough for everybody to ignore you and how dominant you are, because you were able to get that done, especially with Aaron Donald out of the way at this point from retirement. This is kind of Chris's moment, Chris's shot, and really Chris at kind of what you hope continues to be a peak here for a little bit as a defensive tackle, but you also don't want him to have to. It's weird because he's going to be judged on the amount of sacks that he gets, because there's not a stat for how many double teams did you take on. And that's something that in football, from a defensive line perspective, how many double teams did you take on? How many chips did you have? How many times did you have to take on 3 defenders? Those are really the stats for defensive linemen that kind of determine more so than people realize. Is that quarterback pressures, quarterback sacks, and what was the average yardage that they were able to run on your gaps? That's why football at some point is going to have to catch up to what actual stats matter for players, because we can say, oh, this player had this amount of tackles. Okay, well, that's great. But why did he have that many tackles? Was it because this defensive tackle took on a double team and that linebacker was able to flow freely? Or, what's the cause and effect here in some of these regards? So, I'm saying from that, Wharton stepped up, had a really, really big year, and him and Chris together have been really strong. Pennell is just a dominant run defender with his strength. So when him and Chris are paired together, teams are not running from B gap to B gap. But like I said during training camp, you're not doing that. So it gives them it gives Steve Spagnuolo and them a lot of opportunity to be creative, both in run and how they blitz, because of what they are able to do consistently at both defensive tackle spots.
Yeah, and we're going to have to, during an off season at some point, Nick, we're going to have to spend an entire show, or just have me maybe on one of the Tuesday live Q&As on Chiefs Digest do a long-term rant about advanced metrics, because I've been watching baseball playoffs, and it just reminds me that for all of the advanced statistics and metrics that we talk about in football, goodness gracious, football is so behind baseball in so many respects about figuring things out statistically. And some of it's harder, because in baseball, it's a batter versus a pitcher, and you can isolate so many things and so many variables. In football, that's harder to do. And I think that a lot of times, a lot of the numbers get misused. And I think a lot of the statisticians will even agree with that they get misused publicly. And that's a rant for another day, Nick. But to me, it comes down to, yes, you are absolutely correct, because there is no way, at least that we have yet, to truly quantify what a Chris Jones does for a team, because you can talk about the hurries. He's got 20 of those this season. You can talk about the tackles for loss, hasn't missed a tackle this season. Great stuff. You can talk about all these things, but it doesn't address the fact about how many times that he's double and triple teamed, beats it, or that allows someone else to make a play. But I mean, if you just watch Chris Jones in isolation, there's just absolutely no doubt. I mean, the man is playing the best football of his career. And I don't blame him at all. I completely get it, because he was joking but not joking about not getting credit for the sack that was, there's been a couple of times I think he's even gotten some, half sacks at least taken away from him. And he's joked, like I said, joked but not joked about it, because he knows if he's a defensive tackle and he's going to win Defensive Player of the Year, he's got to have like 15 sacks, because that's just how the voters go. It's not right, but that's how it happens. And, you got to have an Aaron Donald kind of year to do that. And you're right. That's the missing piece to his resume. So Chris wants it. I think he can get it, but it's going to be a tough battle. But it's also going to be a PR battle. I mean, the Chiefs are going to have to help him get over that too.
Yeah. So I'll have a question for you. If you, to go back to advanced metrics, because I'm intrigued by this, give me an advanced metric that you want to see at positions. Is there a certain position, or what are some of the big ones? And the only reason I ask is because Next Gen sent me like a feedback thing to give my feedback on stuff I'd like to see and everything. And I gave them my suggestions, and I'll put some of them out here afterwards. But after you answer, but I'm curious to see what you would want to see.
One thing I want to see, and I don't know if this would fit in with next gen and how they calculate things. It would be one for PFF if they wanted to try and tackle it for sure. But I would like to see a ratio as far as, percentage of double teams and triple teams, and what's kind of and be able to get that, because I don't even think that alone tells you something. But if you were to put that into a ratio of whether it was a combination of quarterback hits, pressures, hurries, and ratioed to the number of double and triple teams that you get, I think that kind of would then tell you something as far as how much production is this player getting versus how many single teams, double teams, triple teams that they're getting. That to me would tell you something. I think there needs to be too, like this would be a next gen stats, would be like depth of penetration at the line for defensive linemen. How quickly do they get? I mean, especially for interior defensive linemen, how far do they get into the defensive backfield? Maybe within a certain period of time, or before the quarterback throws the football. I mean, if you're at the line of scrimmage, just how quick? And because that's the thing I think that we see with Chris so much is that lately is that he's just been blowing up the interior of the line, and it's forcing the play other directions. It's forcing whether it's the quarterback or a running back to go a different way. But, where that defensive tackle is, even some of the other defensive linemen, where they are, when the ball's let loose, whether it's the ball's handed off or the ball leaves the quarterback hands, that can be tracked with next gen stats. But where the defensive lineman is, because they're at the line of scrimmage most of the time, or, frankly, on the defensive line of the line of scrimmage, because they're getting pushed back, that tells you one thing. But if they're 2 yards in the backfield consistently, by the time the quarterback gets rid of the ball, that tells you something too.
Yeah, I like them all. Some of them that I put out there that I suggested is something I want to see in next gen or in the NFL in general. I want to see a breakdown of personnel groupings. By down and distance and everything, so fans can have that at their hands and media can have that at their hands. I said one thing I suggested in my feedback was, overall, I really want to have the average miles per hour for each player. Just post that as if it's its own stat, and you can have their best one of the year, but also just kind of their overall average if you can do it. Or even if it's just their best one, I get that too. But I would love to know where offensive linemen are at miles per hour versus where defensive linemen are at miles per hour. And I know that seems weird and everything, but it just, like they talked about Creed getting into space one day on the next gen stat that they put out there, and they said Creed was the top miles per hour offensive lineman on the field. At that one point, and that sparked my interest to where I'm like, I wonder where offensive linemen are, because that would give you an accurate reading of what guys can do when they're pulling in space, and especially if you can take those numbers and use those for players you're looking at from a free agency perspective, if you want them to be able to pull and stuff like that. And I told him I want to see a stat on how many pancakes the player has. How many times did they bury somebody in the dirt? How many times did they combo block? How often did they, do they double team, or how often do they chip, or, whatever stat they want to call it. I kind of want to see what they're normally able to execute. And I don't necessarily need a success rate. I just want to know how often they get those reps from that perspective. And I mean, there was a whole bunch of things I had on there. Like, I would love to know receiver wise, how many out routes they ran in a game, how many verticals they ran, all that type of stuff, and just those type of things. And then I'd love to know how many times a back had to stay in for pass protection. And just all those type of things and everything. And I know that's a lot. That would be a lot of work from having watched film, but part of me kind of wondered, with the way Prime Video does that AI stuff, where they put the graphics over that, is there a way where you can pair a computer model with each game of coaches film, or how the NFL goes about it, and be able to capture all that for every NFL team and every NFL media member to be able to see, and hopefully fans too, and kind of put that in real time. And then down the road, if the NFL establishes it and does it enough, can you put that to college football down the road? And then when the technology gets a certain level cheapness wise, can you put that at a high school level? So then that helps high school recruiting get to a certain level and kind of gives them baseline on a lot more things than just what a 40 time was. And then that, but it's going to, as you and I both know, it's got to start at the NFL and get to a certain level and practice, and before it can kind of go down to college. And I think that would help. I personally think that help a lot of NFL teams kind of be able to really kind of navigate from an athletic perspective, to where maybe they're not just having to do baseline off what some guy did 20 years ago versus this current player, and they have more real time kind of numbers about what they've already physically done rep wise.
And I think that there's a reasonable chance that teams may already have some of this data, and it just hasn't trickled down yet to the third parties and the researchers and anybody else. I'm going to throw one more out there, and this is I know PFF's not listening to our podcast, although they should, but the one thing that they should be able to do, if anything, and it has annoyed me for years, is tell me if a receiver is lined up on the line or in the backfield. I don't care if they're lined up on the left and the right. I want to know if they're the X or the Z. I want to know what they are. I need to know. That tells me more than left or right. Telling me whether they're in motion, anything of that nature. I mean, that's a distinction that tells me more than just, like I said, left and right. It's the only thing you get. You get left, right, and slot. Mm-hmm. And by and large, that tells me nothing. It doesn't tell me anything about the usage of that particular player, because then you look at it and you're thinking, okay, well, Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice may look exactly the same. Mm-hmm. No, they are not exactly the same. They're playing two different positions, but that they don't make that distinction. I know Next Gen Stats could and should do that too, so I'll put them on it. But good grief, I mean, PFF alone should be able to do that. I mean, they do it for defensive linemen. They tell you exactly whether they were signed up on the left end or the right end, which needs to know, because you need to know whether, like when the Chiefs were facing Nick Bosa, you need to know, is he lining up over the left tackle or the right tackle more? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's important information. Knowing if a guy is an X or the Z is pretty important information. So that's my rant.
I see what you're saying, Matt.
So this is a roundabout way of coming back down to where we started by saying Chiefs defense has been really good this year, Nick.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I mean, I posed this question on the Countdown to Kickoff show, and I'll ask you this, and then I'll answer it as well. In the weeks ahead, what do you think is the thing that opponents are going to attack when it comes to the Chiefs to try to move the football on the Chiefs defense?
That's a good question, because I've thought about that too. How would I attack the Chiefs defense? And I mean, at some point, you've got to figure out how to do is, how do you take a team's aggression and use it against them? And that to me is Chris Jones. How do you take Chris's aggression and his ability to break into the backfield and bust up plays? How do you use that against the Chiefs? Mm-hmm. I mean, I would think one extreme, you'd probably need to run more screens. if you're a defense more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you find some other ways to get the ball behind Chris, whether it's just, obviously some teams have found some zones against the Chiefs with tight ends. It feels to me that it's been more of a middle of the field situation. And that's a good spot to be. I mean, that is putting you behind Chris Jones, but I'm even thinking of quick passes, just quick unders to tight ends, little short crossers over the middle. I mean, anything that you can do to really try and just get the ball behind Chris, when he's the one playing downhill and breaking up things, because the chances are there's somebody else. So, if you're attacking, if that leads you to throw the football behind Chris, which means you're throwing the ball at Nick Bolton a lot, that's probably where I would go. But I think if you're a team and you're running the ball between the tackles right now against the Chiefs, well, there's a reason why you're averaging 2.6 yards a carry. I mean, at that point, it's like you just got to run outside or just completely abandon it or find some ways to throw the ball to the back, shorten the flat, because that's another area that the Chiefs have had some difficulty in. So, I mean, to me, if I'm looking at the two, weaknesses, well, I'm going to say three weaknesses. The three places that I would have tried to attack the Chiefs defense. I mean, one, I'm doing that. I'm trying to get the ball behind Chris, and if it's throwing the football, I'm throwing it Nick Bolton. I'm trying to get the ball to my running backs in space on the edges, and I'm probably doing that towards Jalen Watson's side more than Trent McDuffie. So I'm not challenging Trent McDuffie in any way whatsoever, probably going to the other side. And if I'm throwing deep and this just has more to do with maybe anecdotal evidence, but also the fact that he's still coming over the injury, I'm throwing at Brian Cook. I mean, until Brian shows that he can consistently, make plays. And I love Brian Cook. I mean, I think he's got a great future in this league, but I don't think he's 100% back from the ankle injury yet. So if I'm throwing deep, I'm throwing in Brian Cook's direction.
Matt, you nailed it on all three levels. Proud of you.
Oh my goodness.
And the reason I asked that question is because I think the 49ers are going to try a lot of that. Because the 49ers offense is what they try to be is they try to do a perimeter zone. And then they have some creative blocking to be able to help them on cutback lanes and things of that nature. So part of me thinks that the Niners are going to try to run the perimeter at the Chiefs, not just run power in between the tackles, but really try to stretch them out and tire out that defensive line. That I think they're going to use play action pass to use their aggressiveness against them at various points, because that's part of what the Niners do. And with a quarterback like Brock Purdy, he is a guy that he's a rhythm quarterback. So disrupting his rhythm is going to be key. And I mean, any quarterback can be that way, but for some quarterbacks, it takes longer to get back to that than for others where, it couple plays, maybe a series, but or some guys that it gets rattled, like Carr. As soon as Carr took a couple hits, he was going to be inaccurate half the time, and anytime he's going to see another blitz or something coming clean, he was just going to toss it up and throw it off his back foot and throw a Derek Carr punt. That's just kind of who he is and what he does. But with the Niners, from watching them, not only against the Seahawks and some other opponents earlier this year, Purdy loves to use the boot, and so that's going to be something that Chiefs are going to have to be mindful of on that backside, and they already know it from playing him in the Super Bowl. He does love to try to use play action pass, and the 49ers love to call that. And then there are times where they do go into shotgun, and there's a certain rhythm. But what I'll tell you to remember from a Purdy passing perspective, when it's out of shotgun, he is kind of a numbers to numbers guy. He's looking for the pockets and the windows in the numbers. When it's out of play action, he actually is willing to kind of go outside the numbers because he feels like he has more time to set up and throw. But when he's in that shotgun formation, numbers to numbers, 1, 2, 3, throw. 1, 2, 3, throw. And that's just kind of who he likes to be as a rhythm guy. So if you disrupt that, he does get a little bit inaccurate. And then if you take that stretch runaway that they love to do, and his dad taught him from the Denver Bronco days that Chiefs fans saw all the time, that is another way to do that as well. And it's going to be interesting to see, because I know the running back. Here's the thing: they don't have Christian McCaffrey. He's the dynamic guy who really makes that offense go on both sides, and they're having I know it didn't seem like against the Seahawks, but that's because they play them every year. But they're struggling more to be able to be consistent and be able to maintain that spark that they would have when they need to lean on McCaffrey to kind of help them out, because the Cardinals took them out of their rhythm the week before. Like there wasn't a lot they were able to do about it. So part of it for me, from a running back perspective, is that we'll see what happens to Jordan Mason, who had the shoulder injury in that game, and Garindo is the guy who kind of came in, and then they have Patrick Taylor from the Packers, and neither of those running backs were that dynamic. Like Mason gives him speed, and he can kind of still run the perimeter, and he can fit inside that scheme. But McCaffrey he had the vision, the speed, the balance, just everything combined and he could have done some damage out in the flats and catching passes and everything that I think they're going to sorely miss this upcoming week. But yeah, Matt, that's my quick breakdown on the Niners offense. But that's why I asked you, because those things, all things you talked about there, those are all things that I think the 49ers see and are going to potentially try to attack with this Chiefs defense.
Yeah, and you mentioned Jordan Mason. I mean, obviously, if he's healthy, that's a guy to worry about because he's averaged at least 5.3 yards on the ground. Mm-hmm. Chiefs have been taking away running backs, so I'm not tremendously worried about that. And he is no Christian McCaffrey. He's not the threat out of the backfield as a pass catcher, so that's not what he's going to do to you. But let's face it, the 49ers also have a couple of weapons that have been effective against the Chiefs in the past that also fit the profile of players who have been effective against the Chiefs this year in George Kittle and Kyle Juszczyk. I mean, I could see those two guys absolutely ripping the Chiefs apart if they get the opportunity to. Yeah,
Deebo Samuel hurt either his hand or wrists at one point in the game. I haven't looked to see where he's at. We'll see where he's at on the injury report this week. I don't know if he just got something aggravated on a play or what, but I remember watching him come to the sidelines there in the fourth quarter of the Thursday game, kind of shaking his left hand / wrist and kind of, tending to it a couple times. But Ayuk, look, he can do the comeback routes. He can be physical over the middle. And Jawan Jennings is another guy he fits well into finding those voids from zone coverage and everything. So my biggest concern right now is are the Chiefs okay with giving up some ground in the run to not come screaming downhill on run downs to not open up the middle of the field for Kittle and for some of those crossing routes, some of those dig routes that can really cause them some headaches and some problems. But then also knowing when to really, okay, now you got to kind of attack here and get Purdy out of his rhythm. I mean, look, they've played him this calendar year technically, and the offense isn't necessarily much different in terms of what they're going to do or what they're trying to execute. It's just a matter of the fact that McCaffrey's not a part of this offense.
So what do you want to see against the Chiefs from this week? What do you want to see the Chiefs do against the 49ers this week?
On offense or defense?
Let's start on offense.
Okay. On offense, the 49ers want to be so aggressive and attack downhill, just like you were talking the Chiefs want to do. Like their front four, man, they want to get in the backfield and just overwhelm you is what they're trying to do. So the best way you stop that is you physically run right at it for 4 quarters. Does that create a boring game? You bet it does. But if they're going to be aggressive like that, then you got to use play action pass against them. You got to use wide receiver screens against them. And above all else, if that's what they want to do, then there's certain ways you can kind of space them out. I think from their secondary perspective, I think where they're weaker than they were last year is the combinations you can kind of run against them to get stuff open. I think there's a lot more opportunity to really kind of use, a pairing of routes to where you have an out route with a slant, or you have a corner with a post, or you have, the mesh that the Chiefs love to run versus certain things. Like I from what I saw on tape, there's a lot of opportunity to really kind of create the openings that the Chiefs want to to be able to be effective and be able to move the chains on a regular basis. But from a run game perspective, they're going to have to be willing to be physical and run right at Nick Bosa and tire him out just like they've done before. I know in the past they've used jet sweeps, and the Seahawks used a bunch of screens against them to really kind of wreck them and destroy them and everything. And I think all those are going to be there on the table for the Chiefs if they want it. It's just it'll be interesting to see what the Chiefs found out about themselves and what they learned about themselves during the bye week for how they can try to be more effective in the red zone.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if the 49ers, if they have Traveris Ward back this week, that would be a big help for them. Obviously, yeah, Nick Bosa and Fred Warner are the guys that you got to be concerned about the most when you're attacking that defense. But I'm with you. I mean, you got to find ways to slow down Bosa and go right at him. Keep him out of your backfield. Make sure that he's not breathing down Patrick Mahomes' his neck most of the day. That's what you got to do. Defensively, then, on the other side of the football, what do you want to see from the Chiefs?
I don't want to take their aggressiveness away, but at the same time, they need to be a little bit more measured at the second level of when they go downhill. Just pause for a second or two, just in case. I mean, unless you're bringing a blitz to where you think they're going to run the bootleg, then hey, you be all aggressive all you want, and you give them a 10, 15-yard loss if you want to. But I think being measured at how they're going to, when they want to do some of those run blitzes, when they want to come downhill the way they do sometimes in the run game, because the 49ers are going to want to test that and see if they can get Kittle over the middle. Can they get Brandon Ayuk over the middle? Can they get Debo on an explosive play over the middle? Like, I see that being part of what they're going to try to do to be able to really kind of get their offense kind of jump started. Because they've had some problems where there's times where they didn't get a jump start as much as they wanted in previous weeks, and then there's been other times where opponent kind of lets them get into the rhythm of what they want to do, and they just go downhill, and they're able to dominate them in that regard. But they don't. I know it sounds weird to say, but they don't have like a speedster threat like a Worthy or Tyreek Hill type. I mean, that sounds weird to say because you're like, well, Debo's a really good receiver. Yeah, Debo's kind of on the, I hate to say it, but he's kind of on the back nine. So where like you see him have a little bit less explosiveness than he used to. He's not truly a wide receiver. He's more of a really dynamic running back that runs routes, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense because like Ayuk's a route runner, Jawan Jennings is a route runner, and those guys have precision in their game that they need to. And sometimes I think Debo doesn't have that necessarily that same precision. And I think they kind of use him as a gadget player more so than we realize from time to time.
One more thing I want to talk to you about, and that's as the Chiefs get down into the not quite the second half of the season, but got 3 more weeks until they're almost there. But a lot of questions about when Charles Omenihu is going to come back, because obviously this team needs some depth along the defensive line. Been a lot of talk about trying to find a wide receiver. I still wouldn't be stunned if the Chiefs made another deal trying to or another move to try and strengthen that defensive line. I mean, other than Omenihu coming back, it'd be great if they could get Cam Thomas and Marlon Tuipulotu to the level where they're both contributing. Mm-hmm. But Omenihu, I mean, that's still about at least a month away. I mean, Chiefs are still talking November. It wouldn't even surprise me if they held him out until December.
I mean, when he gets back, he will be a welcome addition, even if he's not at 100%, like we've talked about before, because they could use him in the rotation right now. And the Chiefs have been fortunate, knock on wood, to not have the same type of injuries decimate them the way that it did for their offense with Rice, Pacheco, and Hollywood Brown. So, I mean, I'm not wishing that. I'm not trying to speak that in existence or anything. I'm just saying, like, they've been fortunate enough to where because there's certain guys on the D line. I'm not going to name names. You have a pretty good idea, but there's certain guys on the D line that if they get injured, like that defense has a quick drop off in terms of what's behind them and what they can do to really kind of stay where they're at in terms of points per game and kind of what they are in the run game and some of the pressure they're able to get at times.
Well, Nick, Chiefs are 5-0. They're going to remain 5-0 after this week, so nobody's going to catch them during the bye week. After that, obviously, going to the 49ers. Going to be got a little time still before the Chiefs get back. They will not be back at Arrowhead the rest of October, so you have to wait until November before you get to see the Chiefs back at Arrowhead. So a few more weeks you have to watch them on the road, and then that November 5th game with Broncos coming back to Kansas City will be the next time you get to see I think that I've got that straight.
Buccaneers Monday.
Oh, thank you. The Buccaneers Monday night. That's the one. Yeah, it's the following week with the Chiefs and the Broncos, and KU has a Saturday game the day before. I'm really excited about that one to see how that plays out. But that's it for the bye week. Hey, we will be on the Chiefs Digest live stream Q&A on Tuesday night. And of course, next week when the Chiefs meet the 49ers, we'll be back on your feed with 41 is the mic to break it all down. Nick, anything else you got to add for this week?
Nope. Till next time. Bid you adieu.
You've been listening to 41 is the mic, presented by KSHB 41, your home of the Chiefs and Chiefs Digest.